Hello everyone, I'm Ibro Saric, Grandmaster from Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are going to start in this video course about positional play. We are going to start with a very important subject of positional chess, that is an isolated pawn. So what is an isolated pawn? Here on the board we see white's pawn on d4. It's called an isolated pawn because there are no other pawns on the neighboring files that can protect this pawn. So this pawn will be protected in future by white pieces, and it can become a liability, it can become a weakness. An isolated pawn, of course, also has its advantages. What are those advantages? First of all, isolated pawn in the center gives white, in this case, it gives more space. If we compare this pawn on d4 compared to pawn on e6, we see that white's pawn took more space. Another important positive thing about isolated pawn in the center is that it provides us with strong outposts in the center. So for example, in this position, the outpost on e5 and sometimes of course also on c5, but most importantly, most often we see square this strong outpost on e5 being very useful for white in these positions, because generally the knight will from f3 exploit this square going to e5, and it will cooperate very well with the rest of white pieces, especially, let's say, if white owns the bishop, light square bishop on b3, then together with knight on e5, it creates a lot of pressure on black's position, on black's king side. When we are playing with an isolated pawn, we basically have two different strategies, two methods. The first method is using this activity of pieces in general, and then to try to attack the black's king. We will see that in a few examples. And the second strategy, second method, is to play for pawn break in the center, d4, d5. Sometimes when we do d4, d5, let's say we might be less ambitious and maybe we just want to get rid of the isolated pawn, and then after exchange on d5, position becomes equal. But sometimes when we go for d4, d5, we are hoping to get a strong initiative due to some tactical features of the position, and it might give us initiative. The side who's playing against an isolated pawn, it's important for that side to control the square in front of the pawn, that is in this case d5 square, which is a nice outpost for potentially for black pieces. As with every weakness, before we try to attack that weakness, we first want to make sure that we fix that weakness so it cannot be moved forward. And then, of course, after obtaining control over the d5 square, black will try to apply pressure on the isolated pawn. Meanwhile, exchanges are beneficial to black, the side who's fighting against isolated pawn, because with each exchange, the dynamics in the position are disappearing slowly and the endgame is approaching. So that would be very useful for the side who's fighting against isolated pawn. Now let's look how these strategies work in practical chess. The first game that I want to show you is an old game, Botvinnik against Vidmar. Mihail Botvinnik, ex-world champion, was a really strong player, and he played many games with an isolated pawn where he was able to prove that an isolated pawn in the center can become really strong, and in such positions he would exploit space advantage, activity of his pieces, and the dynamics in the position. Here white pieces are definitely more active, and white has more space. Botvinnik's move queen d3 is a very logical move. White is preparing rook a to d1 to give protection to his isolated pawn in the center, and this queen on d3 is also very useful on this square, because white, as we will see later on, use the queen from d3 and transfer the queen to the king side along the third rank. So after move in future like knight e5, the queen then can be moved to g3 or to h3, occupying active position and creating threats against the black's king. Another important method of creating some threats against the black's king here in connection with queen on d3 is white often moves the bishop to c2 and then creates this battery, creating threats against black's king, forcing black to weaken his king side, and which can be beneficial for white later on when he creates an attack. So in this position, black played knight b to d5. This move is not the best one. Black has a very solid position, but a little bit passive position. He should try to exploit this outpost on d5. As we said, it's a very important square. However, it's more accurate to use this d5 square to occupy it with the other knight, because black would offer some exchanges, and as we already said, it's important to exchange pieces when we are fighting against isolated pawn. After knight d5, however, white, in my opinion, should still keep some slight advantage, whether he typically retreats with bishop d2, then he will get some slight initiative in these positions with knight e5, and then the queen will be moved to the king side. It's also possible here to be cooperative and to exchange, to do this exchange, because the resulting position, let's say after knight e7, rook a to d1, rook c8, is still more favorable for white after, let's say, move like bishop c2, for example, now creating forcing black to weaken his position on the king side, or let's say we could also occupy the central outpost on e5 with the knight. In these positions, white would be more active, and although black has a very solid position without weaknesses, this position is a little bit passive. And the most important thing, as long as black doesn't create pressure against our isolated pawn, then we feel safe. So let's see what happened after the less accurate move knight b to d5. White occupied this outpost on e5. Black played bishop c6, rook a to d1. Another important point here, white could have just do this exchange. He could take the bishop, and it seems like it's a good exchange for white, because now black is also having a weak pawn on c6. However, practice has showed that such positions in general are quite alright for black, because white pieces are not so well placed to exploit the weakness of pawn on c6, and black managed to exchange this strong knight on e5. His game is quite easy here. He will play something like queen d6, move the rook to d8, and apply pressure against the isolated pawn in the center. So I believe Botvinnik rightly decides to not to change pawn formation in the center. So he goes rook a to d1. Queen is transferred to the king side. Black finally manages to exchange a pair of minor pieces. Generally speaking, that should ease his defense. However, in this exact position, it doesn't do that much, because after knight takes, white pieces are simply much more active. Knight on e5 is really excellent. It cooperates very well with the bishop on b3, and queen on h3. And here white goes f4, which basically breaks defense of blacks in this position. White simply aims for f4, f5, when he will obtain a powerful attack. Black played rook c8. G6 wouldn't really help, because white would simply continue g4, followed by f5 next. After rook c8, f5, rook f5, we could say that white's position is already winning, because of tremendous activity of his pieces. And Vidmar played queen d6 here, but this allowed a very nice sacrifice, knight f7, when after rook f7, white wins after bishop f6, or let's say if black takes with the knight, then white can simply take rook f6, because the rook on c8 is hanging. So black took with the bishop, but after rook d5, the game ended as follows: queen c6, rook d6, queen e8. Of course, if black takes the rook, then he will lose the rook on c8. So after rook d6, queen e8, rook d7, black resigned, because he's losing huge material. Another very instructive example in which white managed to exploit in a beautiful way the dynamics which isolated pawn in the center offers him here. White plays knight e5, and it is clear, of course, white pieces are more active. But on the other hand, bishop b7, it seems like black is perfectly fine. He does have problems with development. He has obtained control over the d5 square, and yet white develops a very powerful initiative with the next move. White plays rook e3. Just as in the last game, in the game of Botvinnik against Vidmar, we saw white's queen being on d3, then transferred to the king side along the third rank. Here we see a rook transfer to the king side, which is no less powerful. Rook is aiming for g3 or for h3 square. Black plays g6, blocking bishop on b1, trying to consolidate his king side. Rook c8. This move is already a mistake, such a natural looking move. However, after this move, white's initiative will be simply too strong. Black had to realize that the position is very dangerous, and the only way to continue here is to create some active counterplay. He should have tried that with move knight c6, immediately creating counterplay against an isolated pawn. After bishop h6, however, black has to sacrifice an exchange, because move rook e8 would lose to the simple knight g6, for example hg, then another sacrifice on g6, and after fg, queen b1, there is no defense against mate. However, after bishop h6 move, black could sacrifice an exchange with queen d4, and for example in the line bishop f8. The position should be a little bit better for white. Of course, exchange is an exchange, so white should have some small advantage. But on the other hand, black has a very solid position without weaknesses. All his pawns are very healthy. He has also two bishops in the endgame, so it would be very difficult for white to convert his small material advantage. Anyway, after move rook c8, black was in big trouble after a3, knight c6, and now the move knight g6. Now black is completely lost, because after hg, bishop takes, and queen b1, there is no way for black to save against mate. He prolonged the game, giving up huge material, but it didn't help. At the end, he was still mated. Queen g6 and queen g7 mate. In the games we just looked at, we saw how white, using space advantage and activity of his pieces, was able to create a strong initiative on the king side, and he attacked the black's king. Here in this game that I'm going to show it to you, we are going to talk about another method of play with an isolated pawn in the center, and that is to go for the d4 d5 pawn break. In this position, white plays a strong move d5. By the way, just to say that here white had a choice. He could have played like in the game that I showed you. He could have tried to exploit the activity of his pieces. So with move like queen d3, for example, setting up this battery. And after bishop b7, bishop g5, provoke some weaknesses around the black's king, g6, occupying a central outpost on e5 with the knight. And after rook c8, however, the game would be quite unclear. It is clear that white has certain chances on the king side. However, black controls the d5 square and can obtain some counterplay on the other side, especially in connection with the move knight c4. Another option here for white was to go knight e5, bishop b7, and then, just as we saw in the past example, rook e3, a rook lift, transferring the rook to the king side on g3 or to h3. However, in this position, Kasparov was playing Ivanchuk, and he decided that it was more promising to do this pawn break with d5, and indeed it is very strong. Now black has a choice. He didn't accept this pawn sacrifice. He played move knight c4. Let's see the idea of white's d4, d5 in general if black takes the pawn. Then white develops a tremendous activity. Especially important part of d4, d5 plan is that the e-file is opened, and this bishop on e7 will feel under pressure in the next few moves. White continues bishop g5. Now, in some lines, white may actually be threatening to take the bishop on e7 to sacrifice the exchange, then to take with the knight on d5, completely ruining black's kingside pawn formation. So very natural bishop b7, but then white goes queen d3, threatening h7 pawn, g6, and now rook e7, a very nice move to make. Queen d4. Now black is in big trouble because his dark squares and the pin are just these problems not possible to solve. After, for example, king g7, white goes rook e1, queen d8, queen h4, and white is just clearly better. There will be possibilities, you know, of strong attack, perhaps move like knight e5 with the idea of knight g4, or move like knight d4 followed by rook e3, rook h3. In any case, black would be in big trouble. If black tries to take the pawn, the central pawn, with the knight, let's see what happens. White will take queen d3, threatening mate, g6, and queen c3. In all these lines, also it doesn't help black that his knight on a5 is a tactical weakness. Black should play d4. Natural move bishop f8 simply doesn't work because white takes on e8, takes on f8, and simply picks up this d4 knight. So black's best chance is d4. However, then after d4, white of course doesn't exchange his queens, he just takes with the knight. And the point is, after bishop f6, there is this strong move queen f3 with a double attack, and black will lose the exchange. So Ivanchuk decided to go knight c4. However, after queen d3, rook e8, Kasparov played the powerful move a4, which gave him a clear positional advantage. After e d5, a b5, a5, b3, knight d6, followed by knight d4, white was just positionally much better. Now black was having an isolated pawn on d5, very nice piece on d4 for white, and which gave him clearly the better chances. In this game, white decided also to play this powerful pawn break d4, d5, which gave him a lot of initiative. Black took with the bishop. Let's see what can happen if black takes with the pawn. Then white continues creating threats after queen h4. The main problem for black is that the most natural move g6 fails due to knight e4, exploiting the pin along the d file. Black has to play king g7, but now queen h6, and white wins after bishop takes, followed by knight g5, and black can resign. In such a position, move like h6 will also lose, because white can simply sacrifice a piece, and here there is no defense when white plays knight g5 next, and then he also has other possibilities. Black will soon be mated. And another possibility after d5 is to take with the knight on d5. However, this also fails due to bishop h7. Very nice move. And now rook d5, when black has to take with the bishop, but after bishop e7, queen e7, knight g5, there is no defense anymore. So in the game, black played bishop d5, but after knight takes, pawn takes, white continued the attack with queen h4. Black was forced to weaken his position with h5, and here white could have emerged with a clear positional advantage, in any case, with a strong attack as well, with the move knight d4, because it would be really difficult for black to fight against all these active ideas like knight f5, or in some lines sometimes playing b4, removing the knight from a5, and then exploiting this possibility of knight c6. Sometimes the pawn break in the center d4, d5 will not lead to anything special, but perhaps a small advantage at best. Let's say in this position, white went for d5. He could have continued instead knight e5, which would lead to another method which we already covered, that is trying to exploit piece activity and perhaps attacking opponent's king in future. However, after d5 and all these exchanges on the square d5 led to just a slight advantage for white due to slightly the more active pieces. The rook was strong on the d file, and black has to defend very precisely. He didn't manage to do so after all, and white won in the endgame.